So the current administration wants to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Many are saying that this will finally lift many families out of poverty. I'm going to have to disagree with that assertion, and I plan to show you why I think raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour will have no meaningful effect on the U.S. poverty rate and may actually worsen it in the short term. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, I'm Don Owen, and this is DFY Informed. Thank you for watching. Hit like if you like, dislike if you don't, and subscribe if you want to hear more from me in the future in other videos. Now, let's get started. Let me begin by saying that this video is part one of a 2, maybe 3-part set of videos on this topic. I'll try to keep my videos under 10 minutes, as that's about the maximum attention span for viewers these days. So I do hope you come back for the sequels. In 1968, the federal minimum wage for U.S. workers was $1.60 an hour. At the end of 2019, the minimum wage was $7.25 an hour. In 1968, the poverty rate for families stood at 10%, while at the end of 2019, the poverty rate for families was at 7.8%. Why did I start with 1968? 1968 is an important year when looking at the minimum wage because it was the high watermark for minimum wage in terms of purchasing power. And let me illustrate with some examples. I pulled minimum wage data and poverty rates from the U.S. Census website dating back to 1959. In 1959, the federal minimum wage was $1 an hour, and it stayed there until 1967 when it was raised in 1968 to $1.60. I then converted minimum wages to time. In essence, what I said was 60 minutes worth of a person's labor would purchase $1 worth of some product or service in 1959. I searched for some products that were around in the early 1960s and that are still around today and whose basic utility, that is, their basic functional value to the consumer, hasn't changed much. The first product I picked was a pair of Levi's Original 501 navy denim jeans. In the early 1960s, one could purchase a pair of 501s for about $5 or, converted to time, about 5 hours worth of an individual's time who was making minimum wage. Today, a pair of basic 501s can be found on Amazon for $42, or at today's minimum wage, about 5.8 hours of an individual's time. I also found a pair of men's loafers in a 1959 Sears catalog for $6.97, or 7 hours of working labor. On Amazon today, I found a virtually identical pair of loafers for $49, or slightly less than 7 hours of working labor. The price of a Big Mac meal was just under $1.60 in 1970. Today, a Big Mac meal cost about $7.89. Both time frames about equal to 1 hour of minimum wage labor. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I took 60 minutes worth of a person's time and I standardized that from 1959 to 2019. And the following chart shows the minimum wage converted to minutes of labor adjusted for inflation over the last 60 years. 1968 at 45.38 minutes represents the least amount of time a person had to work to earn what 60 minutes of labor would have been needed to buy in 1959. At the end of 2019, a person needed to work slightly over 72 minutes to earn what a person working 60 minutes earned in 1959. 2006 represented the time the minimum wage had the least purchasing power, when the $5.15 minimum equated to almost 80 minutes of working, comparable to the 1959 60 minutes. These numbers came right out of the calculator available at the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, so please feel free to check my numbers. So what would the minimum wage need to be today to be equal to that of 1968 in terms of purchasing power? Well, according to the CPI inflation calculator, $1.60 in 1968 equates to $11.74 today. If one were to go all the way back to 1959 and use that year as the basis for comparison, the minimum wage, if adjusted properly, should be about $8.86. Look, there's little doubt that a raise in the minimum wage is probably needed. It hasn't increased since 2009. But if it is put at $15 an hour now, that's going to put it at a purchasing power level surpassing any minimum wage seen in the last 60 years by a 23% margin. Now, proponents of this plan suggest that this will raise a lot of families out of poverty. Will it? I don't know. There's really no historical/empirical data that supports this. In fact, if one simply looks at the time frame of 1968 through 2019, one finds no significant correlation between poverty rate and standardized minimum wage. Now, granted, a $15 an hour rate would be so far outside of anything historically seen, who knows what will happen there. If one looks at the unemployment rate versus poverty over the same 50 years, one does see a significant correlation between those two. The majority of time periods, poverty rate was below the historical average of 10.3%. The unemployment rate was less than 6.5%. The majority of time, the poverty rate was above the historical average. The unemployment rate was above 6.5%. What will happen with unemployment rate and poverty rate when the minimum wage is increased? Well, I don't know. What I do know is that since 1968, the minimum wage has increased 13 times. In the year following the increase, 8 of 13 times have seen increases in the unemployment rate, and 9 of 13 have experienced jumps in the poverty rate. Again, an increase to $15 an hour is a bigger jump than the labor market's ever had to digest. This is totally uncharted territory. Rest assured, if the minimum is more than doubled over the next few years, prices are going to go up. They almost have to. Corporations are not going to willingly take a hit on their profits through increased labor costs. They'll pass it on to consumers. And let's also consider this. The minimum wage has traditionally served as a baseline relative to every other job in society. So when the minimum wage doubles, supervisors' pay is going to go up, their managers' pay is going to go up, and it's only going to be a matter of time before all classes of jobs recalibrate to this new baseline. The cost of labor goes up through the entire corporate hierarchy. So I think that one reason increasing the minimum wage has had little to no effect on changing the poverty level in the past is because eventually everything simply recalibrates to this new minimum level. What one can buy for $7.25 today, an hour's worth of one's labor, will cost about $15 an hour's worth of one's labor in the very near future. In my next video, I plan to break down the components of the minimum wage, unemployment, political party, and poverty rate model in more detail, and also provide a little more analytical insight as to the relationships and the strength of these relationships. Also, I'll give my thoughts as to why this administration is pushing so hard to legislate a huge increase in the minimum wage, knowing good and well it's likely not going to help and may even hurt the poverty rate. Also in the next video, I'll show you why I think raising the minimum wage may actually increase rather than decrease the wealth gap that the left loves harping on so much. But as always, I encourage you to do your own research and to decide for yourself, informed. Have a great week.